Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Yvonne Loraldi. I am one of the special education social workers in Northside Independent School District. And today we have joining us is Lauren Schuler. She is the Director of Community Services and Case Management at the ARC of San Antonio. And the ARC of San Antonio has two locations here in San Antonio, one on Wurzbach and the other on West Avenue, and they service individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and they have various programs and resources to serve that population. So if you get a chance, visit their website and go ahead, Ms. Schuler.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the introduction. As she mentioned, we do have several programs. I'm not going to focus too much on the individual ones today, as I do want to talk to you guys about the Texas Medicaid waivers. But as she mentioned, check out our website. All of our info will be at the end of the PowerPoint once I'm finished getting through it. I do not want to speed through it, but I also want to leave a little bit of time for questions and discussion at the end as well. If you have a question throughout, I don't know how you guys want to field those. If you want me to just keep an eye on the chat and I can answer them as I go as well as they come along so we don't lose them along the way.
We'll be monitoring the chat.
Perfect.
So those who are on, just visit the chat and you may get answers from Jeanette or Lisa or myself. Hopefully we can answer your questions. If not, we'll put them in a parking lot and have them ready to go for Lauren at the end.
That sounds fantastic. I like that idea. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start with the waiver programs here so that we can just jump right into it and get going. Let me put that in presentation mode. All right, everyone can see the slideshow. Give me a nod or a thumbs up. Yes, okay, fantastic. I've got your faces hidden so I can see my full screen. If you need something, just holler at me and I'll pull everybody's faces back up. So as I mentioned, I'll be going over the Medicaid waiver programs today. These are state provided programs, but some are served at through the local level. And I'll get into those kind of ins and outs with each waiver as we go along. So before we get started, I know in the world of education and special education in particular, there are a plethora of acronyms, right? Everybody has acronyms for everything. IEP, ARD, BIP, you name it, right? So just a few to kind of get your mind in the right headspace before we jump in, because you'll see these throughout. Health and Human Services, HHS. You'll see SSLCs mentioned throughout. That stands for State Supported Living Center. You can think of that as a like a state hospital or an institutionalized setting as what we consider those. LTSS is long-term services and supports. And then down at the bottom here, you have some more specific terms. A DID is a determination of intellectual disability. That's a process that families will go through when putting their individual or their loved one on an interest list with the waiver programs. An ICF is an intermediate care facility. LIDA, you'll hear that a lot. That's your local intellectual and developmental disability authority. And in Bexar County, the LIDA is ACOG. They are the local IDD authority here. And then an MCO you might have heard before in relation to Medicaid. That's a managed care organization, and MCOs play a part at times in these waiver programs as well. So to kick it off, what is a Medicaid waiver program? It is a program that allows the state to be more flexible in how it spends money in providing LTSS to people with disabilities. And they were created to offer services that are not typically covered under traditional Medicaid. With traditional Medicaid for children, you age out of that at 21 on your 21st birthday. And then there are only specific situations in which you can get Medicaid in adulthood. Medicaid for people, elderly or people with disabilities is one of those ways to get Medicaid as an adult through the waiver programs as well. But that Medicaid does not cover certain services and supports that you will need into adulthood with a disability. Therein comes the waivers. So the waivers were also established in the state of Texas to use an alternative for individuals with disabilities being forced to live in a state-supported living center. So in the past, being in an institutionalized setting was the only way that Medicaid or providers would pay for these long-term services and supports for individuals with disabilities. If you weren't institutionalized, there was nothing available for you. So this is an alternative to that as well. And with each waiver program, as you'll come to learn as we go through, there are different rules, qualifications, and funding amounts. I'm not going to get super into the nitty-gritty funding aspect of it because every individual's waiver program is based on what their needs are and how the budget is broken down and so on and so forth. So I could go for 3 hours about these. Today, I really want you just to get out of it that they exist, and how to begin the process of getting on these interest lists if you or your loved ones are not already. So waiver means that they waive certain rules for how state funding can be used, like I mentioned before, by waiving certain requirements for Medicaid. For example, the biggest one being family income, meaning if you or your child does not qualify for Medicaid because it's a needs-based, income-based social service, welfare, health-related service, you can still place your child or loved one on the interest lists because they do not look at family income for eligibility. They are only taking into consideration the individual with disabilities, income, and resources. That's a big misconception often because Medicaid is attached to the terminology, but it is not the same requirements. It is waiving that family income component. And I'll stress that throughout each waiver that we specifically go over as well. If someone meets the eligibility requirements for the waiver programs, they can get the services they need in their own homes or other community-based settings, again, as a way to encourage the community integration and discourage institutionalization. People who receive waiver services, so this is individuals who are no longer waiting, but have the actual services in place. They've waited their time on the lists. When they begin receiving services and they become eligible to receive that waiver program, they will in turn also get full Medicaid healthcare benefits attached to that waiver program. That's where a lot of the confusion comes in as well, due to the fact that you get Medicaid when you're on the waivers, but you don't have to be Medicaid eligible to get put on the interest lists. I know it's kind of confusing, counterintuitive. Hope to kind of clear up maybe a tiny bit of that confusion today, and then you guys will be able to go back and watch this recording, in the future if you have any questions or need clarification on any of this stuff as well. So just to give kind of a snapshot of what the waiver programs look like for Texas in terms of funding and where we are currently, the average cost to fund an individual's waiver program, their waiver slot, is $51,000 annually if they are actively receiving a waiver program. The cost covers things, as you see, such as nursing care, respite, therapies, dental, behavior services. Each program has different things that it covers and things that it focuses on supporting the individual with. The average cost for that same individual to live in a state-supported living center is $362,000 a year. Now, that's a massive discrepancy there between funding a waiver slot and funding their slot to live in an institutionalized setting. Now, just by looking at those numbers alone, you're like, okay, yeah, duh, it makes more sense just to give everybody a waiver program. But the lack of funding for the waiver programs in Texas is so huge. We are so far behind in funding these waiver programs and getting people off of these interest lists. Right now, I believe there are 8 state-supported living centers left in the state, and they house about 3,000 individuals total. And there are over 160,000 unduplicated citizens currently waiting on these interest lists for services. So there is no way, even in a perfect world, that these state-supported living centers could even house and cover and provide services to these people who are needing them. The 160,000, that's just self-reported. So that's just the people who are on the list. That's not counting the people who need to be on them and don't know about them, or think they're on them and aren't, or, the list goes on about that as well. In total, there are over 300,000, I guess not people, 300,000 names on multiple lists at once, right? So there's a lot of people. One of my coworkers just put an individual on the class list this morning, and they were number like 91,000 something in line. So this obviously leads to extensive interest lists, extensive wait times, honestly, most up to 15 plus years at that point, at this point in time. Now that it's kind of like a punch in the gut and knocks the wind out of you every time you hear that that number, but we always like to say it's never too late. So as long as the individual has received a diagnosis of some sort of intellectual or developmental disability before the age of 22, they can be placed on the list at any time in their lives. We encourage you to place your loved one on all interest lists that they qualify for or that they may qualify for. And then just regular housekeeping, keep everything that is mailed to you, contact the interest list annually to verify status, and notify the programs of any changes in address or telephone number, because that is how they keep track of you with any updates and changes, potential changes that occur. So in total, there are 7 waiver programs in Texas: Texas Home Living, Home and Community-Based Services, Community Living Assistance and Support Services, or CLASS, Medically Dependent Children's Program, MDCP, Deafblind Multiple Disabilities, or DBMD, Youth Empowerment Services, or YES, and the STAR Plus waiver. Again, each one has different rules and qualifications, and I will get into those here in just a second. If you would excuse me, I will be right back, ladies.
Okay, I think we have a question in the chat, and let's see if I can go ahead and answer that. It says, since it is tied to the student's income, does the student need to have their own bank account to have proof of annual income of the individual? So they are going to look as Lauren said, at the family's income, but that's not a qualifier. Again, they're looking at the disability. So you explained that there is a parent who has Medicaid and private insurance, I believe. And individuals can have private insurance and Medicaid at the same time. And you can still, so you have to have Medicaid to access the waivers, but there are also benefit counselors available to help with that as well. So there are individuals with both. So it's good to go ahead and not decline the Medicaid if they're offered. And we've got another question. Are there efforts to advocate for more funding change in these policies to increase access with the Texas government? Some of us have kids who will probably pass before they get approved for help. There's ongoing efforts every year to advocate for more funding constantly through the state legislature. It's great if parents can reach out. I know the legislature is going to reconvene this January 2025. So if you want to reach out to your representatives, that would be great too, because the more they hear your stories, the more our representatives know how high the need is out there for these services.
Perfect. I apologize. Thank you so much for your patience. We're
That's
at a
a,
pretty
that's okay,
decent
Laura. I was just answering a
block
couple
in
of
the road.
questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything before I get into the specific waivers that they had questions about?
There was one that asked it since it is tied to the student's income, does the student need to have their own bank account to have proof of annual income of the individual?
No,
So the parent's income is not really looked at, and
that's
those
correct. Yeah, so
are,
they'll ask you for probably your tax returns, right?
mhm.
But especially if the student is under 18, or the child, I should say. I say student because I'm in a school presentation. But if the individual is under age 18, you don't have to have a separate bank account to show that they have zero or nothing like that. It's just understood.
And those over 18, because we do have some 18 plus.
Yes. Yes. And then that's the same. So they're just going to look if they have a job, if they have SSI or anything like that, but they should still be Medicaid eligible.
And the second part to that question was if they have Medicaid and are covered under a private insurance, should
Uh-huh.
they decline Medicaid? And I was
No.
telling them they can have both.
Yes, 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 yes. You can have both. Please do not ever decline Medicaid. Oh my gosh. So quickly, I'm just going to go over the 7 waiver programs. Um, if my mouse will work. All right, so home and community-based services supplies services and supports to Texans with intellectual disability or related conditions so that they can live in the community. The Asian diagnosis requirement is any age with an IQ of 69 or below or 75 or below with a primary related condition. Yeah, here comes the financial component. So the monthly income has to be within 300% of the SSI and monthly income limit for the applicant only, so just for that individual. The approved living options, group home, host companion home, or natural home. So that's a fantastic component to the home and community-based services. The LIDA, again, that would be ACOG for Bexar County, provides service coordination for this waiver program. You cannot be actively enrolled in another waiver program if you're actively receiving services, but you can be on any other waiting lists that you want at one time. Services include nursing and psychological care, residential and ISS, which is individualized skills and socialization, formerly known as dehabilitation, which is huge for those folks at REDX specifically who are wondering what comes after they age out of the REDX program. ISS is one fantastic option. Excuse me, respite care, behavior services, therapies, etc., dental care as well. The kicker here is that it's currently a 15+ year wait for these services to kick in. Texas Home Living is the next one. That's going to be very similar to HCS in that Asian diagnostic requirement. The only 2 differences are going to be the financial eligibility component and the approved living options. So the Texas Home Living does not include the group home piece, and you have to be Medicaid eligible at the time that your name comes off the list. So the income limit is a little bit smaller there with 100% of the SSI monthly income limit. And in total, the budget that you have for Texas Home Living to spend on services is less than HCS. Now, the good news is they're both provided, service provided through ACOG. So what a lot of people will do, since it has a bit of a shorter wait list, is to get on Texas Home Living first. And then when their name comes off the HCS list, they will then transition over to the HCS program, therefore receiving more funding, additional options for living, etc. So that is, those are the 2 programs that are I guess coordinated is the word, coordinated through the local authority. And again, for Bexar County, that is ACOG. If any of you happen to live outside of Bexar County, you can put those counties in the chat and I can try to direct you to your local authority. There's a local authority for every county in the state. Some counties, some local authorities oversee multiple counties. ACOG is just Bexar County, obviously, because Bexar is a very large county in the state, but there is one for every county here. All right. And then we have the CLASS program. You might have heard of CLASS. They are probably the most well-known, most common waiver program that's thrown around out there. It stands for, again, Community Living Assistance and Support Services. Now, this is a program for people with what they call a related condition as an alternative to an ICF home. Remember, an ICF is an intermediate care facility. And those are Medicaid funded homes. The state identifies a related condition as a disability other than ID, intellectual disability, that originated before age 22. Many of the ones that we see when we place individuals, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, spina bifida, muscular dystrophy, autism, Down syndrome, you name it, they have a list of over like 200 plus related conditions on the HHSC website. But it cannot just be an intellectual disability alone in order to qualify for the CLASS program. There has to be that related condition component to CLASS. Does not mean you cannot have an intellectual disability, but that cannot be the primary diagnosis. Again, the age and diagnostic requirement, any age, again, as long as the disability onset prior to age 22 and meeting that level of care criteria for an ICF. A good example I give for someone who would not qualify for CLASS is someone who sustains a TBI in adulthood, right? So maybe they sustained a traumatic brain injury, which causes an intellectual disability and other disabilities related to that TBI, but it onset after age 22, they would not qualify for the CLASS program because it is not a disability that they had in childhood. The financial eligibility is going to be the same as the HCS program, which we talked about, that monthly income within 300% of the SSI limit. The natural home is the only option there for approved living options. The big goal for a CLASS is to keep individuals in their natural living environment. And the way that CLASS works, since it is coordinated at the state level by Health and Human Services, a local case management agency along with a direct services agency organize the services needed for the individual to achieve their maximum levels of independence. And they do that by creating what's called an ICP, an individualized care plan. The case management agency meets with the families on a quarterly basis to update their plan and their budget and their services to make sure everything is up to date and good to go on what they're still continuing to need help with. And they meet, like I said, quarterly, and they're in contact monthly at the very least, constantly checking in and updating the individual's status and services. Again, with all the other programs, you can be on any interest lists that you want while receiving CLASS, but you can't receive CLASS and another one simultaneously. Services include very similar to the HCS program, nursing and psychological care, respite care. You can use it for ISS, behavior services. One thing that the CLASS program really boasts is the funding that they offer for specialized therapies and dental care. So if you've got an individual or a loved one who has specific needs in those areas, or you think they will in adulthood, maybe they're receiving, equine therapy or aquatic therapy or music therapy, something like that. Currently, that's something that the CLASS program can continue helping fund into adulthood. With dental care, if your individual requires sedation for dental care, Medicaid does not pay for dental care after age 21. It's a perfect example of where the waivers can come in, cover that cost, and you can still obtain the dental care that your individual needs. As with the HCS program, CLASS has an extremely long wait list. 15 plus years currently is what they're ballparking. Probably closer to 18 if I'm going to be honest, up to 18 years right now. So again, the sooner the better, but it's never too late. So those are really the big three heavy hitters, right? We've had HCS, Texas Home Living, and now CLASS. Those are the three you hear the most about. They're the most common, the longest wait lists. I'm going to get into a few more specific waivers now. As there still might be some people who these could apply for or could apply to, and that you can put them on the interest list for. And we'll go first into the MDCP program, Medically Dependent Children's Program. This is a waiver specifically, as it states, for children who meet a nursing level of care need under the age of 20. So you have to be age 20 and under, and they determine the nursing level of care need by their own criteria. And when I say they, it's the state. This is another state coordinated waiver program. And essentially how it works is you put your individual on the list. If they have any sort of medical condition related to their diagnoses, we recommend that you put them on this list. We've heard of people who have a loved one with Down syndrome who has like cardiac issues or who is in the hospital frequently for GI stuff. If they see any sort of specialist outside of the normal, primary care physician and a dental, if they have any sort of specialist they see on a regular basis or they've been hospitalized for any amount of time in their past, we recommend putting them on this list as well, because we have seen individuals get funding from the MDCP program who aren't technically what you would consider nursing level of care. With that being said, it's a long shot, but it is a way to kind of work the system in your favor because it has a shorter wait list at this time. Typically, the MDCP program, though, is going to be for those individuals who require life-sustaining measures, right, on a regular basis. A trach tube, a G tube, you know, wheelchair bound, things like that are typically the individuals who are put on the MDCP program. Now, again, this is just based on the child or young adult's income. You can only live in the natural home. Obviously, we don't want to institutionalize children, especially who require nursing level of care. And the services provided include what you would expect the child to receive if they were in a nursing care facility. So personal care services, private duty nursing, respite care, any home modifications or adaptations needed to make your home safe for whatever accessibility concerns you may have. Currently a 6-ish, again, a big-ish wait. Year wait for the MDCP program is about what we're seeing currently for that. Next, we have deaf, blind with multiple disabilities, also known as the DBMD waiver. This is a waiver, as it states in the name again, for individuals who are deaf, blind with multiple disabilities. This one gets a little tricky in its verbiage and kind of eligibility, so stick with me here. You have to have, again, that related condition onset before age 22. And the diagnosis of deaf blindness does not have to be present, though, at that time. The related condition can result in deaf blindness in the future, but obviously there has to be some sort of documentation that that's going to occur if it's some sort of degenerative disease or something that will onset in the future as the individual gets older, as well as an additional diagnosis. So that multiple disabilities component is very important. And they look at things kind of holistically when they do the evaluation, as it states here, that you must exhibit substantial limitation in 3 of the following areas of major life activities. So those are as follows: learning, mobility, self-care, language, self-direction, and independent living. And that is up to whoever from the state comes and does that evaluation when the time comes for your name to be released off of that interest list. With the DBMD program, the options for living are the natural home or a group home. And again, things that you would imagine needing with these diagnoses are covered for the waiver program. Any adaptive aids, medical supplies, specific audiology, ophthalmology, orientation and mobility equipment, if you need a walking cane, a wheelchair, things like that. And then obviously the therapies and the respite care are a continuation of the services provided by most of the other waivers as well. All right. And then finally, we're getting into 2 of the more broad waivers from the state that are not necessarily disability specific, but do also serve individuals with disabilities. And this first one is the STAR Plus waiver. This often in the IDD world is seen as a transitional waiver from the MDCP waiver, which is just for children. So this is a service for adults with disabilities over the age of 21 or anyone 65 and older. Hence why it's not just for individuals in the IDD population. So again, this encourages individuals to remain in community-based settings and not nursing facilities. This is a great waiver program for individuals who were previously on MDCP because it does have that nursing level of care component attached to it still. Oftentimes when an individual has been on MDCP in childhood and they're still waiting for their class placement, they can get on the Star Plus waiver for the time being. And then when their name comes off the class list, they can decide where their funding really is needed most and pick the waiver that best suits them. But in any case, this is an option too as a transition from the MDCP program. This isn't an interest list that you can be put on now and wait for your individual. Again, it's transitional from MDCP or if you're over the age of 65. And it allows for things like day activity and health services, which is kind of a step down from like an ISS program. It's seen more as like an adult daycare, but still extremely beneficial for these individuals to get out into the community in some capacity while they're waiting for, let's say, the class waiver or the HCS waiver to kick in and pay for that ISS slot. Personal assistance, habilitation, adaptive aids, home mods, again, nursing, respite therapies, you name it. Those are all very similar in terms of service provision. And then finally, we have the Youth Empowerment Services waiver, and that's called the YES waiver. This is the standalone waiver that is provided by your local mental health authority. Now, stick with me here. The local mental health authority for Bexar County is Center for Healthcare Services. Some counties, some smaller counties specifically, have their IDD authority and mental health authority combined into one LIDA, right? Some do not. Bexar County's mental health authority is Center for Healthcare Services. So this waiver is standalone in that regard. As well, it is a short-term waiver program. All of these other ones are for life. Once you're put on the program, once you're done waiting and you're on one of these waivers, you are on it for life unless you choose to stop receiving the funding. This one is meant to be, as I mentioned, a short-term program, being that it's for mental health difficulties. So obviously, if you think about it, you don't want to be in a mental health crisis long-term, right? Disability stays with you forever. These mental health issues are obviously, in best case scenario, treated with the appropriate services and then get better over time, right? So specifically, the YES waiver provides intensive services with a plan that they call wraparound through Center for Healthcare Services. They are community-based, family-centered, in the home. The whole goal here, again, is out-of-home placement. That's a common thread through all of these waivers, is preventing out-of-home placement and institutionalization. The services you can expect to receive if you're on the YES program: specialized therapies, community living and family support, supported employment, paraprofessional services, respite, transportation, any adaptive aids and home mods that you need, more in terms of like safety in the home for the individual experiencing the mental health concerns. And again, it's all with the family, with the team of specialists that you're working with through Center for Healthcare Services. Individuals who are eligible have to be ages 3 through 18, have already a pre-existing qualifying mental health diagnosis, so this waiver cannot be used to diagnose mental health issues, and be at risk, actively at risk of being placed outside of the home due to those diagnoses, as well as having been hospitalized at least once within the last 12 months. And that's a big key there for the YES program that I was not aware of beforehand. You have to have already been hospitalized one time within the past year to qualify for the YES program. This is an alternative, and you have to kind of exhaust all your previous options before you can get to this point. And then again, eligible for Medicaid for the individual only. And the average kind of service duration is 11 to 18 months, and that obviously just varies based on level of intensity of need for the individual. As I met with them a while back, and their goal is to kind of be really hands-on, really intense in the beginning, and then kind of as the time goes on, 3 months, they want to back off a little bit. 6 months, they want to back off a little more. At 9 months, they're really going to say, hey, we're coming up on the end here. And then if needed, they can extend. But again, the goal is to complete that wraparound plan in that amount of time. Center for Healthcare Services phone number is there. And that is the 7 waiver programs in a nutshell. I know I went fairly quickly. I'm happy to answer any questions about the waiver specifically or the services the ARC provides in general. I'd love to have a discussion with you guys if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Lauren. I believe I answered The first one that we spoke about when you
Sure.
back from your break. Um, and I believe I answered John's question. He was wondering if these programs are only for those with intellectual disabilities or for others with physical disabilities as well. I heard you kind of cover
Absolutely.
that, but I don't know if you want to answer that again.
Yeah, so physical disabilities, absolutely. So with the HCS in Texas Home Living, it does have to have that IQ component, that intellectual disability component related to it. But for the class waiver specifically, or even potentially, I'm not sure of the diagnoses you're speaking of, but the deafblind multiple disabilities or MDCP, the physical disability can be the primary diagnosis, absolutely, and qualify you for those programs.
Um, how can a parent or relative be a paid provider?
Ah, the age-old question everybody loves to know, right? So that is only possible once you begin receiving the waiver funding, and that's done through a specific process where you technically become the provider for your child, and you can choose to like be your own child's provider and get paid and reimbursed through the waiver program. It's very confusing. Unfortunately, the only way to do it is to be actively on the program. And I can pull up here. Let me stop the share really quick, and I'll pull up a different screen here quickly that explains a little bit about how that works in Texas. Okay. Oh, don't give me this runaround right now. Um, in any case, that's how it works. You basically hire yourself, um, and then you are your child's caregiver. Especially if the individual is under the age of 18, they don't see that, unfortunately, in Texas as being anything other than the individual's like guardian, their parent, whatever you want to call it. So CDS, Consumer Directed Services, there it is. So you can do a CDS option with the class program, and that allows you to um, to kind of do that work around that loophole and become your child's paid caregiver. Here, let me drop this link in the chat here. I found it. I appreciate your patience.
And is class the only waiver that allows the CDS option?
Class, as far as I know, is the only one because otherwise, like with HCS, you would do like a host home. You can be your child's host home provider. It's a little bit different in terms of the way the funding works and the payment works. It's also, like I said, nitty-gritty and detailed that I'm not going to pretend to be the expert on each one. Um, but class is the main one where if you're on it and your child lives in the home with you, you do that CDS option and become your child's paid caregiver at that point.
Okay. Um, we do have another question.
Sure.
Once you start receiving services from a Medicaid waiver, but something changes where another Medicaid waiver would be more appropriate, do
Mhm.
you need to get back on the wait list?
For the one that you're dropping or for the one that you're wanting to switch to?
She has a follow-up. Could you get on multiple wait lists until one is available? So it sounds like
Absolutely.
if you're on a waiver and you find out that there's a service offered that you're not getting on that waiver,
Hmm.
maybe you learn that it's on another waiver and you want to
Absolutely.
move over. Do you have to get back on the wait list? Do you have to start at
No,
the
you do
beginning?
not have to start over. So what we recommend doing is getting on all of the ones that you may think you're potentially eligible for all at once. And then whoever sends you a letter in the mail first, take it. Go
Mhm.
through with the evaluation process. Cross your fingers, hope they say yes, get on that program. While you're on that waiver, let's say it's the MDCP waiver, right? In childhood. While you're on that, your name is still inching up on the other wait lists as you go, as you go, as you go, as time goes by. Eventually, you're going to get a call, let's say from the class program. At that point in time, you have to make the decision. with your care team, with your family, your support system, whatever, your child, and say, okay, I'm going to weigh out the funding, I'm going to weigh out the services each provides. And that is the only time that people stop receiving one and go to another is if they say, okay, I'm going to drop MDCP and I'm going to move to class. That's really the only way we're seeing right now, like the class program has slots opening up, is if someone dies or switches to a different waiver like HCS. They are not really releasing new slots at this point in time. That is only like inter intermixing and changing from within.
So if you're on the MDC, Jazia, I think, posed this question. If
Uh-huh.
you're on like the MDCP waiver, but
Uh-huh.
your child's name is not on any of the other waivers, um, and you're looking to seek services on another waiver, you would have to put your name on
Yes. Yeah,
the
you've got to be
list.
on the interest list. So you can be on those interest lists simultaneously. You just have to pick. If you have the option to have two, you have to pick one. So get on all of them. Like
Yes.
that is my biggest advice so that you're not on the MDCP program and then that you age out of and then you haven't done anything else with the other ones. And then there's another 20-year gap before you can get on another one. Um,
Um, our next question is if our children are able to get on SSI after age 18, are parents allowed to be a paid caregiver through SSI? I
oh
believe
gosh.
they're talking about Medicaid once they get Medicaid after 18,
Yeah,
through
I
SSI.
I don't believe so. That there's no caregiver option that I
For
know of
SSI.
through Medicaid and SSI alone. The waiver program is the only way in Texas to have that happen.
Also, do you have, let's see, do you have to already be on MDCP or MDCP wait list to be eligible to get on class waiver?
No,
No.
no, each waiver is separate from each other. They all have their own interest lists, their own funding streams, and their own wait time. You do not have to be on one to be eligible for the other. Absolutely not. Good question.
Anybody have
I had
anything
something really
else?
quick. I know it was discussed earlier on
Sure,
about, advocating because of the funding,
absolutely.
and policy changes and stuff. And are there ways to get like stats, or is there a website that really shares is, because Yvonne
Sure.
did recommend saying like, hey, contact your local representative because this is a problem, right? And so we really want to ensure
Huge.
that, and so the more that take it to that next level, hopefully we can, maybe drive some change. So I know
Absolutely.
you shared some stats within your presentation, but are there other
Sure.
areas that we could find that or,
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I would recommend the Arc of Texas website has a whole waiting on the waivers um, section, and it goes and it breaks down different details about why the waits are long, how you can get involved locally and at the state level. Their advocacy changes from legislative session to legislative session. One of the big things we at the Arc of San Antonio are focusing on coming up is actually the pay for direct care workers and the reimbursement rate there so that we can provide these services to the adults with disabilities continually in our day program. But the interest list and the Medicaid waiver programs are always something that we're pushing and advocating for on a minuscule, day-to-day level, like I'm doing with you guys. We do presentations like this all the time to try to get parents one-on-one. And the encouragement, Yvonne, like you said, to advocate wherever you can. Look up your county and your city council members and ask to meet with them and talk to them about your children with disabilities. We are constantly meeting with local government representatives, city council members, Congress people, trying to just inform them of the IDD population as a whole and how big the gap is really in the services that we provide in San Antonio, being such a big city. And the state in general, we're like 48 out of 50, I think, in waiver services. They're so underfunded. But the state just is really dragging their feet on funding these waiver slots because for whatever reason, they don't see it as a necessity still.
And I believe Lisa answered John's question. So you can apply to get on class waiver waitlist after age 18 and still be eligible. And
Absolutely. Yep.
yes.
As long as your diagnosis occurred before age 22, you will absolutely still be eligible. We help families all the time whose kiddos are 17, 18, 19. They've just moved here, they've just found out about the waivers, and we can still place them on those lists.
Can you talk a little bit about community first choice? That is under Medicaid, although
Right.
you can get assistance accessing it through your
Yeah.
through the waiver, but you can also access it by going through Medicaid. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, to the little knowledge I have, Medicaid is its whole own beast. And with our case management program that I oversee, we don't actually serve individuals with Medicaid because they have case management and service provision through their MCO. Oftentimes that is community first. So as you mentioned, Yvonne, exactly, community first is an MCO for Medicaid. They are a provider also for Medicaid through the waiver programs. They're the option that we typically recommend going with. When your name comes off the list, they'll ask you to choose an MCO. There are several. I think Community First, there is Star Kids, there is Molina, there is, I'm missing one, and they
Superior.
just, yep, Superior, and there's another one that they just changed the name
There's
of
a
that
new
I'm
one.
blanking on.
Yeah, I always blank on the new one.
Yeah, and I forgive me, but they all have their pros and cons. Community First is a local one, which is nice. It's one that families seem to like. I don't know much more about it than they are a great option for an MCO, whether it's through the waivers or through Medicaid in general. And they're out there.
And also to let everyone know, that question from Becca in the chat, community for, don't, there's two programs and the names are very similar, so it's hard not to get confused, but there's Community First, the health plan, and then there's Community First Choice, which is kind of separate funding through Medicaid for specific a small set of specific services,
Right.
which is personal assistance services and habilitation that you can access.
Yes. Yes. And again, there's a whole world in that regard that I am not even super comfortable and familiar and well equipped to talk about, because that gets into the specifics of the different experts.
Yeah.
Like we consider ourselves the experts on getting you to the other experts, right? Like informing you of the base level knowledge and the overarching importance, and then pointing you in the direction of where you need to go to get all these specific details kind of ironed out and figured out. So forgive my lack of knowledge specifically on Community First Choice, but they're around, they're at fairs, they're here, and they can provide great services as well.
Okay. Are there any other questions people would like to ask? Either put in the chat or unmute and ask? Any
While we wait
scenarios?
for those to come in, I'm going to put my PowerPoint back up really quick. I forgot to go over the kind of like what now. If your individual or loved one or someone you know is not on these interest lists, the first step is to call Health and Human Services at this 877 number. The only thing you can do there is place them on class MDCP and DBMD, but you can also check their placement status on any of the other interest lists throughout the state. So they can't place you for the local ones, but they can check if you're on them at the very least. So that will be your first step, is to call that 877 number. You're hit with an automated voice. It'll say, "Thank you for calling Texas Health and Human Services." You press 1 or 2 to select your language. Then you press 1 again to to check placement or place an individual. If you're placing them for the first time, what they're going to do is ask you some basic demographic information. They're going to go through about a 20-question questionnaire, and you're going to get an interest list ID number. That's your confirmation of placement. And then you'll also receive a letter in the mail several weeks later confirming that same thing. You're going to want to hang on to that interest list ID number in the interim between the time that you place and the time that you get the letter of confirmation. And then the same is true for ACOG. You can call them and begin the process that way. Or what we can do at the ARC is you can call at any point in time. If you would switch over my PowerPoint, our main line, we have a case manager of the day on call every day of the week who can assist with filling out that questionnaire with you and submitting it to Health and Human Services and ACOG on your behalf. That's really the extent to which we can take things. After that, it's really on the parent or guardian because they're going to have you come in at ACOG for what I talked about before, that DID, determination of intellectual disability. And I can't coordinate that. They're going to call you and they're going to coordinate a day and time for you to come in and do that evaluation and fill out their own application. But I, at the very least, or we at the ARC at the very least, can get you on the lists and get that process going for you so we can take that burden off your hands.
Somebody asked if the PowerPoint can be shared.
Yes, I will send that to you, Yvonne, and you are more than welcome to share that with whoever registered today, whether they attended or not. It's no secrets here, like I mentioned. Please share it far and wide. You can put the recording on your YouTube, whatever you'd like, and the more people see and the more eyes and ears that see and hear it, the better.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have about 8 minutes here. Last minute chance for questions. Okay, all right. So we will close it up here, and thank
Perfect.
you, Lauren, for joining us and providing all that valuable information and sharing that with our parents. Thank you so much.
My
That
pleasure.
was a great presentation and helped kind of streamline the process and the information. So thank you so much.
I hope so. Thank you for having me. I know it can be a lot to take in. Sit with it for a little bit. You can email the ARC, call us anytime. I'm happy to answer more questions about the waivers. But again, if you take nothing away, just call that 877 number, check on the placement, and if they're not on the list, you can give us a call and we can help you out with next steps.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining us today. And please keep a lookout for future virtual sessions that we will be presenting as well. And if you sign up for those, we'll be sending you the link from the registered list. Okay,
Awesome.
thank you
Thank you guys so much
everybody.
for having me.